speaker for is Vasile Stanescu, who's a PhD candidate in modern thought and lit at Stanford. He's also the associate editor for the Journal for Critical Animal Studies and the co-editor of the Critical Animal book series published by Rodopi Press.
Hi, my name is Vasile Stanescu, and my talk is Why Loving Animals is Not Enough, a Feminist Critique. And this is a highly abbreviated version of an article that's coming out in the next issue of the Journal for American Culture. And I brought my timer to make sure I didn't go over time. Dr. Kathy Rudy, a professor of women's studies at Duke University, recently published 2 defenses of eating animals, an article entitled Locavore, Feminism, and the Question of Meat, printed in the Journal of American Culture, and a full-length manuscript entitled Loving Animals. The essential argument in both texts is that feminist ethics allows for the raising, killing, and eating of animals as long as they are loved or cared for while they are still alive. Furthermore, she claims that these goals of care are achieved in practices such as locavorism and humane or compassionate animal agriculture. Moreover, she specifically cites as proof the farming practices of small-scale farmer Katherine Friend as a model of what such a farm might look like. In my presentation today, I would like to critique the work by Kathy Rudy and the practices of Katherine Friend as emblematic of a larger movement that seeks to merge feminism with justifications for the continued consumption of animal products. In contrast, I believe it is precisely from a position of both feminist and queer epistemology that we are most equipped to criticize the raising and killing of all animals, even when such practices are labeled as humane or compassionate. Part 1. Humane farming violates the animal's rights to funny kinds of love. In her book-length manuscript entitled Loving Animals, Kathy Rudy forwards the claim that non-human animals are capable of loving humans. Here's how she phrases it. I believe that emotional connections with real animals, connections based on love and shared lives, need to be included in the discourse of animal advocacy in order to maintain and model a better world for them. This approach to advocacy is not only about humans loving animals, but also about animals loving us back. I recognize that animals have a choice, and one of the many choices they have to make is to become loving, to choose to be loving animals. But if animals can make the choice to love or not to love humans, surely they must be able to make the choice to love each other. And if animals can love each other, as Rudy herself would seem to argue, humane farming, even if animals are given a name or a little more room, can never truly exist. The falseness of this happy meat pastoral image has been written by Alice Walker in her essay, Am I Blue? Ain't These Tears in These Eyes Telling You? In this short story, Walker tells the story of meeting a horse who possesses every criterion that Rudy holds for humane farming. For example, he has a name. He's well fed, he's not beaten or mistreated, and he even has 5 beautiful acres in which to run around. However, Walker, who also believes that animals are capable of love, rejects the treatment of Blue because the female horse Blue has fallen in love with is taken away from him. Here's how Walker describes this event after Blue's partner has been taken away. One day, after a visit to the city, I went to give Blue some apples. He stood waiting, or so I thought, though not beneath the tree. When I shook the tree and jumped back from the shower of apples, he made no move. I carried some over to him. He managed to half crunch one. The rest he let fall to the ground. I dreaded looking into his eyes, because I had of course noticed that Brown, his partner, had gone. But I did look. If I had been born in slavery, and my partner had been sold or killed, my eyes would have looked like that. The children next door explained that Blue's partner had been put with him, the same expression that old people used, I had noticed, when speaking of an ancestor during slavery who'd been impregnated by her owner, so they could mate and she conceive. Since that was accomplished, she'd been taken back by her owner, who lives somewhere else. Will she be back? I asked. They didn't know. And it's this experience that causes Alice Walker to decide that even if animal products are marketed as humane or happy, it is still unethical to consume them. Part 2, all animal farming supports sexual violence. Katherine Friend is a committed feminist who entered into the farming practice as a way to combat both traditional gender roles and heteronormativity. She, therefore, represents Kathy Rue's important call for young women, gays, and sexually different people to see themselves well reflected in food activism. One would, therefore, presume that in formatting a humane standard of care, acts of forced female copulation represent an area of ethical care for both Rudy and Friend. However, in the very book that Rudy cites as an example of a desirable humane farm, entitled Hit by a Farm, Friend and her partner Melissa hold down a female goat and force her to have what is clearly undesired sex in order to effectively match their breeding program. In a chapter actually entitled, "Let's Just Forget This Ever Happened," this is how Friend describes the practice. Quote, "At Mary's, we led Ambrosia, Friend's female sheep, to the converted chicken house, into a building about 20 feet by 10 feet, with bare board door, and Bozeman, the male sheep, came flying in, eyes wild, lips curled at the scent of ambrosia. Our goat took one look at this creature and began running. I couldn't blame her. Not only do intact bucks reek with an indescribable scent, but this guy's head and neck were oily, greasy, and matted with something foul. Ambrosia wasn't buying it. Who could blame her? We watched Bozeman chase in a circle for 5 minutes. Is this how goat sex usually goes? I finally asked. No, Mary said. Usually the doe stands still. Ambrosia must be near the end of her cycle. She can still get pregnant, but she isn't willing to stand still. She sighed. I'm afraid we have to hold her. Groaning, we stepped forward. Melissa grabbed Ambrosia's collar, but she twisted away. Mary and I cornered her, but she slipped past us. Finally, it took all 3 of us to catch Ambrosia. Then, unbelievably, we restrained her head and torso while Bozeman, loopy with lust, flung himself on her and began thrusting her hips. No one said a word, as Bozeman concentrated on the task at hand, and Ambrosia grunted indignantly. I held my breath to avoid Bozeman's aroma. Finally, I muttered, "Can I still call myself a feminist after this?" The blind spot of both Rudy and Friend's thought is extending core issues of feminism, gay, and queer rights, such as the control of one's own reproductive life and sexual choices, to only human animals. But as Carol Adams has taken great pains to point out, feminism should not simply end at the species divide, nor, for that matter, should gay, lesbian, or queer rights. Female non-human animals should be able to choose their own sexual partners. Period. Let us not split hairs or speak in euphemisms. Every animal product, whether it is labeled free-range or organic, local or compassionate, supports sexual violence. All meat and dairy and eggs are the product of human-sanctioned sexual violence, and therefore it must violate the most basic ideas and values of feminist or queer theory, regardless of the identity of those who might own such a farm. As Carolyn Zerlowski has written an essay entitled, "The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's Rape Rack, Feminism and Animal Rights." And here's the big question, the question I don't really want to ask, because it makes me wince. It makes my skin crawl, and it fills my heart with horror. This is the topic that gets me in trouble with feminists again and again, perhaps because it makes so clear the ultimate thing we're not supposed to notice, this horrendous interconnection of oppressions. Did you know that many farmers nickname that place where our non-human sisters are artificially inseminated the rape rack? The rape rack. They actually call it the rape rack. This is not a term I constructed to be shocking. This term comes from our collective psyche and the psyche of farmers. Some version of this device, no matter of what it is called, is central to all animal farming, rather permaculture or factory farm, local or distant, humane or otherwise. Feminist visions cannot come true in a world where rape racks exist. A feminist world cannot be a world where anyone, any life, human or non-human, male or female, black or white, 2 legs or 4, could ever be defined solely based on their relationship to such a paradigm. Conclusion: from love to justice. What most concerns me is that these expressions of feeling of care for animals serve to mask the simple reality that for the entirety of their lives, these animals live as only a buyable and sellable commodity, who exist solely at the whim of their so-called owners. Such a view changes an issue of social justice, capturing the idea of animal rights, to one of mere charity, which consequently can be compromised or abandoned at will. This viewpoint represents a particularly troubling oversight for feminist theory, which has taught me to mistrust rhetorics of love and care when structural systems of violence and oppression still continue to operate unabated. As Katherine has written, in regards to the similarity between loving women and loving animals, quote, "People dominate animals, men dominate women. Each is a relationship of hierarchy, an inequality, with particularities and variations within and between them. Every inequality is grounded and played out and resisted in unique ways, but parallels and overlaps can be instructive. One prominent similarity between those two hierarchies is ideological. In spite of the evidence that men socially dominate women and people dominate other animals, the fact that the relations of these domination and subordination exists between the two is widely denied. The denial of social hierarchy in both further relations is supported by verbiage about love and protection, including what has been termed the humane movements. The idea is love of men for women, or people for animals. Motivating their supposed protection mitigates the domination. Neither with women nor animals has redress of abuse of power changed that power's underlying distribution. Loving women is an improvement over hating them. Kindness to animals is an improvement over cruelty, but neither has freed them nor recognized their existence on their own terms. As long as animals can be owned, bought, sold, and treated at their so-called owners' whims, the concept of loving animals will have little impact. While some individual so-called owners may choose to treat their animals better than others, the ideas that animals can be owned at all reinforces the notion that they exist only as human property, and as such, the concept of loving animals in any form loses its power as a societal critique. Only when we think in terms of not only loving animals, but also in terms of social justice for animals, can we begin to navigate the complicated issues surrounding non-human animals. As Bell Hooks wrote in regards to feminism, without justice, there can be no love. The same is true, I would argue, for our relationship with non-human animals. Thank you.